Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. Going to be talking about the collapse of the USA, the hurricanes, the fires on the West Coast, the strange things that are going on between the left and the right politically. We're going to talk also about a spiritual principle that's discussed in the book called The Way to Live. This principle is called Fulfilling Your Duty to Yourself. I'm going to play a series of clips about Hurricane Irma and Harvey, again, about the struggle between the left and the right going on in the U.S. and the fires in the West. And also, I'm going to talk about religion. There's some interesting research done on that, and then I'll try to finish up the show talking about creation and the bands of our universe, maybe a little bit about the Giza intelligences. I don't know exactly how much time I'm going to have to try to get this all in. And this is the dilemma. There is literally a cornucopia of information here, excuse me, and trying to pick what to talk about becomes challenging, particularly when you're talking about the prophecies, because the prophecies are being fulfilled. Billy has written what are called the Henoch prophecies, and I'm particularly not a expert on the prophecies of the Maya material, but you can just see these things occurring. One of the big prophecies in Contact Report 215 is that there will be massive destruction in North America. And I've often said on this show that I was trying to do my part to make sure that doesn't happen. And I'm holding out that we're not going to see this happen. But it's still, the hurricanes keep happening, the fires keep happening. So what does it say? It says, destruction in North America, and this is Contact Report 215. Far in the west, it will be different. The United States of America will be a country of total destruction. The cause of this will be manifold. Her global conflicts, which are continuously instigated by her, and which will continue far into the future, America is creating enormous hatred against her worldwide in many countries. As a result, America will experience enormous catastrophes that will reach proportions barely imaginable to the people of the earth. The destruction of the World Trade Center by terrorists will only be the beginning. Yet all the apocalyptic events will not only be brought about due to the use of unbelievably deadly and destructive weapons such as chemical, laser, and others. Let me just stop right there because I didn't make a clip of it, but I recently saw an article or an interview of Michio Kaku on one of the major networks. And he said that lasers can be used to create hurricanes. Let me continue. Such destructive weapons such as chemical, laser, and others, and by cloned murder machines. But in addition to this, the earth and nature maltreated to the deepest depths by the irresponsible human beings of earth will rise up and cause destruction and bring death unto the earth. Enormous firestorms and gigantic hurricanes will sweep over the USA and bring devastation, destruction, and annihilation. As this from time immemorial, never before will have happened. So, that's Contact report 215. Again, I'll cover this a little quickly, and we'll play some clips on this later today. In Contact Report 544, it talks about 2020 as being the possible collapse of the United States. It says, and Billy was on the Great Mothership with Semyase in 1975. I know I'm just barreling ahead. If people are new listeners, I'll go back and give a little bit of the backstory here in a minute, so this makes a little more sense. Billy Meyer, he's 80 years old. He lives in Hinterschmid-Ruti, Switzerland, which is a small, tiny mountain village. It's about 45 minutes east of Zurich. He's had telepathic contact with extraterrestrial humans and physical, face-to-face contact. He's been on their ships since he was 5 years old, and he's written 40 books about these experiences and also what he calls the spiritual teaching, which we'll touch on that in a minute. Allegedly, in 1975, he took a trip on a great mothership. He was picked up by a woman named Semyase in 1975, who was a beautiful woman who appeared to be about 30 years old or so. She's actually like 344 years old. She's from a race of people, they're human beings, that originally allowed themselves to be called the Pleiadians, but they're not from our Pleiades. They're from a star system called the Pleiaren star system, which is about 80 light years beyond our Pleiades in a different space-time configuration. The material part of our universe is divided into 7 different space-time configurations. This is something that we learned from the Maya material as well. And there are human beings in these different space-time configurations which are very similar. For example, the Pleiaren have a constellation of Lyra Vega. They have a constellation called the Sirius system. But in 1975, Semyase picked Billy up in her beam ship. They took a trip around our solar system, did many different things, which I won't talk about right now. They went out to Jupiter, and Semyase flew her beam ship inside a large hangar door. Billy got to go up to the bridge of this ship and speak with Ptah, who is the commander of this ship, who told him that in 2020 that the superpower, the USA, could collapse if nothing changes for the better. Now, I say some things have changed for the better because people around our country are talking about this information, which I think is critical. And I'll go into a little more depth of why I think it's critical. In 1975, there were enormous contradictions in regard to politics, the military machinations, the decline of our culture, the climbing religion. We still see all of that. We see the criminal activity, but what we're seeing is a raise in awareness of a small group, and I think it's a group that will have tremendous impact. And these are the people that are learning what are called the creational natural laws and some of the spiritual things that we're going to cover in the show today. But here in the U.S., we have a gigantic mountain of national debt, $16 trillion. So we're teetering on the verge of destruction, according to the Maya material. Not only are there gigantic hurricanes hitting Florida right now, and again, what did the Maya information say to us? It said enormous firestorms and gigantic hurricanes will sweep over the USA. Well, the enormous firestorms are occurring on the West Coast right now. And they have been occurring, and I have been covering this for a couple of years. The other thing that we're seeing is a great conflict between the left and the right. And one of the prophecies the Maya material talks about is things in the third millennium that will occur. And this is in one of Billy's writings called The Goblet of Truth. And it says, if you human beings of Earth do not turn to the truth of creation and its laws and recommendations in what is now the third millennium, if you do not turn to better and good things and do not follow the true rules of life as they exist in the creational laws and recommendations, then all evil events of all kinds will broaden in ever worsening succession. And one of the things that Billy said would happen in the third millennium would be the removal of self-determination. And that's what we're seeing. Our leaders are taking all the power of self-determination from us. Gun control, loss of freedom of speech, everything is politically correct. You can't say anything that isn't politically correct. We're seeing vaccinations pushed on people. This is the removal of self-determination. And it's a form of mind control. And some people are very, very susceptible to this. And what is going to happen because of that? Well, Billy says, therefore, you are becoming ever more indifferent to one another. Now we have the conflict between the left and the right, more mistrustful of one another, and increasingly emotionless. We see a lot of anger, so that we do see that emotion. But people will be disinterested, and he said they will be indolent and obtuse. Obtuse means slow to understand, and indolent is just too lazy to do the research. So what is happening is there's a breakdown in human connections. Families are even being ruined over this. Some people will have a blazing anger rise up in them. And this is the left. This is the Antifa groups. And it says also that for this reason, for the rapid succession, in that the work is not allowed to lie fallow and must be continued forward, so that the knowledge, despite all the coming confusion and maliciousness, slowly spreads over the world. So that's what we're trying to do with groups like FIGU Canada and FIGU Australia and FIGU Switzerland and the kind of the little diverse, unorganized, split-up groups all over the United States, which I guess I'm kind of my own little version of that. It says, despite all the coming confusions and maliciousness, slowly spreads over the world. So this teaching is spreading over the world. Because only as a result will those of the enormously further growing humanity grasp the knowledge and be guided into the path of true evolution. So that's what we're trying to do here. One of these creational natural laws that we violated is the law of population, which Earth's planets with human beings on them exist throughout our galaxy and throughout our universe. In our space-time configuration, they're a bit far apart. But I think there are about 2,600,000 different human civilizations in our galaxy, according to Meyer material. But they're light years apart. But they're very similar. In order to have human beings on a planet, the planet has to be roughly Earth-sized. And it has to have all the things the Earth does, like water and enough heat and forests. The forests moderate the weather. And our population is supposed to be about 529 million. But it's 9 billion. So because of that, we have to keep chopping our forests down. The forests keep the heat from getting out of hand in the summer because the temporal forest, the tropical forest, create the shade. And in the winter, if you have just snow and ice, all that heat will get reflected back right off the snow and ice. But the forests hold in that heat because they break up the reflection, the albedo. So the forests are designed to moderate the weather. We don't know that. We don't understand that. I didn't really know that until a couple of years ago, or maybe a year ago, actually, as I've been studying this material. And what I've told you about the forest isn't really spelled out with the Meyer information. So part of that is my own research. So validate it or prove it wrong. I'm open to it, you know. They haven't told us everything, and I think that's for good reason. So we do our own research. So that's kind of our introduction to the show today. This is what we're dealing with here. Life and death, survival kind of things. That's what we're dealing with. This isn't about extraterrestrials or entertainment necessarily. I mean, we get into a little entertainment on the show, but really what's going on with Ohio Exopolitics is trying to get out this spiritual teaching so that we don't destroy ourselves. And we're on the verge of destroying ourselves very much. Now, one of Billy's wonderful books is called The Way to Live book. It's the title in German is Die Art zu Leben. It's a book written between November 8th, 1995 to 1997, January the 8th, by Edward Albert Meyer. It was translated by Vivian Legge, Dyson Devine into English. It's a bilingual book with the German on the left side, the English on the right side. It was translated by Vivian Legge and Dyson Devine into English. Again, it's a bilingual book. And it must be considered, you must think about this, that there's an evolution code in all Billy's German spiritual teaching texts that speak to your subconscious, to your unconscious. The code releases impulses from the storage banks that start to work evolutively in the reader. Even if you do not master the German language, just reading it will cause these impulses to slowly penetrate into your consciousness. So, if we would look through this book, you can see the German on the left side and the English on the right side. Occasionally I'll read a little bit of the German just to kind of make sure I'm getting exposed to a little bit of this evolution code. But we're going to stick with English today because I'm sure most of my readers are English-speaking people. Now, the first concept we're going to talk about is fulfillment of your duty to yourself. Be honest, benevolent. Don't turn your back on yourself. To be benevolent means to be kind-hearted, big-hearted, good-natured, good, benign, compassionate, caring, altruistic, humanitarian, philanthropic. But don't turn your back on yourself. Don't have any self-chastisement. No self-abuse, no feelings of inferiority, no bitterness. Be gentle to yourself. Do not flatter your I. The Meyer material tells us that we have an innermost personality that's related to something called our spirit form. And we also have an artificial I or a false I. So don't flatter your artificial self, your material consciousness. Care for the health of your body and your psyche. Challenge your body and your mind. And another thing here, don't devote yourself to your passions, your lusts, your vices, your addictions. Use your intelligence, your rational logic, or you will have no enjoyment in the fulfillment of your responsibility. Now, these little gems of the spiritual teaching coming to us from the Meyer material, you can find some of this information on between pages 28 and 36. Here's an interesting bit on page 28. It says, truly, whoever always hangs around beyond his or her own house becomes the stranger in his or her own home and his or her own family. Precisely that happens with he or she who constantly lives only in distraction. Hangs around in the discos, in the bars, in the hotels, in the amusement parlors. He or she becomes a stranger to him or herself. Foreign in his or her reflecting and striving. Foreign in his or her consciousness. And foreign in all his or her thinking, feelings, and actions. Quite inevitably, such a human being must attempt to throttle his or her deadly inner boredom. In the pushing crowd of the idle people, where he or she loses all self-esteem and the trust in him or herself. Thus, he or she totally forgets to observe and consider him or herself and to see him or herself as he or she actually is. He or she becomes a stranger to him or herself, whereby he or she falls prey to bad embarrassment. When through some circumstances or another he or she finds himself suddenly, therefore, when he or she is suddenly confronted with him or herself. So one of the principles that I should have written down, that's why I'm continually learning right alongside with you here, is that to fulfill your duty to yourself, don't become a stranger to yourself. Don't spend too much time away from home. Don't be in these places, these distractions. It says here, unfortunately, there are all too many human beings who seek out places, events, societies, and circles, and so forth, where on one hand they can boastfully distinguish themselves, or on the other hand, when they are flattered to the point of drooling. Thereby, more than ever, a human being loses the very last taste for the voice of the truth. Not to mention that the last remnant of the self-esteem and the last possibility of recognition of one's duty to oneself and one's own duty disappear and sink into a bottomless abyss. So what we're talking about here is fulfilling your duty to yourself, being honest, being benevolent, but don't turn your back on yourself. Don't chastise yourself. Don't abuse yourself. Don't allow feelings of inferiority to come in. Don't have bitterness. Be gentle to yourself. Again, also on the other hand, don't flatter yourself. Care for the health of your body. Get exercise. Challenge your mind. Focus and learn. Don't be off in distraction on all the time. And don't devote yourself to your passions. Finally, it comes so far that the human being concerned no longer even likes himself. And that's a big issue. You can get where you don't like yourself. Namely, the voice of his own consciousness, which unpleasantly tells him the truth. See, your spirit form will tell you if your thinking is right or wrong if you've learned to pay attention to it. The spirit form is the tiny fragment of the universal consciousness that exists in your superior colliculus in the middle part of your brain. Always care for the best health of your body and your psyche. Do not disregard the health of your consciousness. Whoever constantly challenges his or her body and her psyche and his or her consciousness does good and promotes the fulfillment of the duty to the self. On the other hand, if you devote yourself to your passions and you're incessantly setting the sails of your lusts, your vices, and addictions, you will finally be like one who runs through the smoldering desert, dying of thirst. And I've been guilty of devoting myself to my passions before. I think we all have. If the human being does not continually pay attention to himself or herself and does not devote his duty to himself, then you will decline, you will end in misery, and you will have suicidal thoughts. And others will only respect you if you learn to respect yourself. Don't do hidden things that you might be ashamed of in front of the eyes of a stranger. Learn to speak the truth openly. That's a difficult thing, too, because we all want to kind of moderate the truth and be politically correct and be a diplomat. I'm trying not to do that, too. It also says your clothes speak for yourself, and I'm guilty sometimes of being a little ragged around the edges with the clothes, and particularly on the weekends. Your clothes speak for you because you form your exterior according to your inner self. Never allow yourself to appear ragged in your clothing, in your self-care, forgotten by the world and all alone in the deepest desert. Never lose confidence in yourself. And this goes along with another principle that we're learning from another book that Billy has written called The Might of the Thoughts, that talks about neutral positive thinking. What are 7 characteristics of neutral positive thinking? I'm confident. I'm optimistic. I'm relaxed. I'm cheerful. I'm thankful, I'm enthusiastic, I'm harmonious. Don't despair. Never have bad temper. Boy, I'm guilty of having bad temper sometimes. You do not reach the same high. You know, the truth of the matter is that people, they evolve differently. But we all evolve to these 7 steps. My understanding is, I don't think there's a spirit form in the unbelievable numbers of spirit forms of human beings across the universe that has ever failed to evolve through all those 7 steps. It says, if you want to live in fulfillment of your duty to yourself, never let yourself be controlled by desires. Also, do not allow yourself to be controlled by the desire to be the person that's in the shining lead role. Do not fall into the death of boredom, the trap of boredom. In order to be happy, another of these creational natural laws is the law of striving, to continually be dutifully working. This is also part, I guess, of fulfilling your duty to yourself, to keep striving. And boredom, in a way, is related to self-centeredness and to having an uninteresting inner nature. So many different things are connected with fulfilling your duty to yourself. And your false I that lives within you, your false ego, which you're probably struggling with, which we all do, will attempt to complicate things and will keep you from fulfilling your duty to yourself. And what does fulfilling the duty to yourself mean? It means challenge your mind and your body. It means be honest. It means not turning your back on yourself. No self-chastisement, no self-abuse, no feelings of inferiority, no flattery of yourself, no bitterness, no devotion of yourself to your passions. Instead, use your intelligence and your rational logic. Be kind-hearted to people, good-natured, benign. This is the whole idea of fulfilling your duty to yourself. Okay, now it's time to play some clips. Lots of clips we could play. Bear with me while I set up certain things. Wow, a lot's going on in the world. It's crazy. I'm going to actually cover a little stuff on the fires, which I've totally ignored this year. Fires in California. Here we go.
Hey guys, this is James Hooper with the Impossible channel. It was brought to my attention that Jade Helm 15 might be actually happening right now. It started out in Texas and now it's going on in California. And so this is really awkward. We have a lot of people talking about weather control, geoengineering, and all that stuff. So we're going to show you some footage and videos coming in from subscribers and news that's going on right now, just to give you an update on the situation as promised.
Hi, James. This is David from Duarte, California, and we are being struck by some kind of storm coming. You see the trees. You see how they're bending under the weight of the wind. It is actually very hard to see the mountains from the dust because we had a fire come through here. But we've got something coming towards us.
You just heard that this is going to be a tough fire.
If you have anything you want to send, please do send it to thatimpossiblechannel@gmail.com. We're going to be waiting for you.
So the Meyer information tells us we're going to have tremendous firestorms, and we've seen them for years now. I may have some notes here handy. I'll rip through some of these really quickly for new listeners that may not be aware of this. It's amazing what's happened people are not aware of. The Rim Fire in California in 2013 burned 402 square miles in California. It just about destroyed the Yosemite National Park's sequoia trees. It threatened the water of San Francisco. Do we talk about it? No. The Pony Complex Fire, Mountain Home, Idaho, 149,000 acres destroyed. Typhoon Haiyan in November of 2013 killed 2,487 people, displaced 660,000 people from their home. Winds of up to 235 miles an hour. Did you hear much about it? Not really, just a little blip on the news. The Moore tornado in Moore, Oklahoma, 210 mile an hour winds. That was in 2013. The massive polar vortex in 2014, which caused a massive traffic jam in Atlanta, where people were stuck in their cars. They're on the expressway for 14 hours with no food and no water. A state of emergency was declared in 6 or 7 states. Over 4,000 flights were canceled. The Great Lakes froze a foot thick. This was January of 2014. People have forgotten about this. I don't remember it the way I should. Icebreakers couldn't get through. Fort Bragg was closed. South Carolina was in a state of emergency. A foot of snow fell in Chicago. Some 20 states were hit by massive storms. 2014, the Funny River Fire destroyed 193,000 acres. The Cold Spring Fire, the Carlton Complex Fire burned 390 square miles. That was in 2014 or 2015. The Cold Springs Fire wasn't a big one, but I knew a particular person that was evacuated in that fire, Solaris Blue Raven, who comes on the show sometime. The largest destruction occurred in Canada in the Fort McMurray wildfire, which occurred in 2016, May 3rd. 1.5 million acres destroyed. So keep that in mind as we listen to a few more of these fires that are going on. I've pretty much ignored the fires this year. I don't know why, but I have. I think I'm tired of talking about them. Don't want to face this reality coming on us any more than anyone else does. Let's listen to some more clips.
All right, Steph, thanks very much. A very close call for some kids at a summer camp up in Santa Barbara County.
Yeah, brush fire forced them to evacuate. It's just one of the fires burning right now across California. Cara Finstrom is here. She's got the latest on that. How scary for these kids, Cara?
Seriously, and their parents. Yeah, the good news is that nobody has died in any of the fires that have been burning so far in California. There have been some injuries, but as far as that camp, all of the children got out safely. But as you mentioned, very scary. You want to get started with the latest numbers. CAL FIRE says the Whittier fire has now burned 7,800 acres. At last report, it was 5% contained. 3,500 people had to be evacuated, including at least 80 of those children at Circle B Ranch Camp, which is in the Los Padres National Forest. Now to a look at the flames. They were fueled by strong winds. Those at the camp tell us it burned to the ground. Counselors say some of the kids were so scared they had panic attacks and fainted. The kids were loaded into SUVs. They were shuttled out as the fire burned all around them. Their parents anxiously waited hundreds of miles away until everyone could be safely reunited there in Lincoln Heights. We did speak with one young camper and her mother about the evacuation.
They told us not to touch the windows because the car was hot from the tree that was on fire that we had to drive by.
It was scary. It was very scary because I know how quickly fire spreads, and it was just very scary. I literally sat with the phone in my hand waiting for a phone call.
Folks living.
Okay, now we're going to move on to the LA fires.
Tonight, firefighters battling a blaze spread out over thousands of acres, forcing hundreds of evacuations, destroying homes in what's being called the largest fire in LA history. The so-called Latuna Canyon fire sparked Friday. Fueled by scorching temperatures, low humidity, and high winds, embers hopped California's 210 freeway, creating a tunnel of flames before shutting down traffic. This weekend, the flames marched into neighborhoods.
We got to get this, because if this oak tree goes, it'll carry over, so we got to keep that wet.
More than 1,000 firefighters are on the front lines trying to stop the spread, creating containment on the ground, dropping retardant from the air.
Really, honestly, it's my worst fear.
The fire is burning above Tracy Goldman's home. She and her family spent the day packing anything important.
Our honeymoon picture from 28 years ago, so that can't be replaced.
A few doors down, we watched with Sylvia Gizelgin's family, who just evacuated, looking on as flames pushed into their yard.
Can you just tell me how you're feeling, seeing the flames right there and knowing that's your house?
Sad. I'm a pastor, and I believe we're praying. That's why we're here, so the fire will stop.
Okay, so this lady's a pastor. Let me just speak a little bit about sectarianism and religion is a part of the insanity that leads us so far astray we cannot reconnect with the real truth of things. We will talk more about religion. I've got some interesting stuff that I found out. Okay, the LA fires. Now let's switch to Irma, the hurricane that's hitting Florida right now.
And welcome back to GMS. Harrowing Saturday morning. We are, of course, covering the breaking news this morning. Hurricane Irma bearing down on the state of Florida. It is a Category 4 storm. It is right now making a direct hit on the Florida Keys. It will, through the course of today and tomorrow, move up the west coast of Florida, bringing potentially catastrophic winds, rain, and the key here, the storm surge.
And we want to go back to World News Tonight anchor David Muir, who's leading our coverage on the ground from Naples this morning. Good morning to you again, David, and I understand you have the governor of Florida standing by.
We do have the governor back with us on GMA this morning, Governor Rick Scott of Florida. And Governor Scott, can you hear me? It's David Muir.
I can hear you in my hometown.
I'm glad that you're with us here this morning. I know that
David,
you are watching this very closely, and I wanted to ask you first about that report, obviously, from the National Hurricane Center, the eye wall reaching the Florida Keys. We knew this would happen, and now we just have to wait to see some of the damage coming in. What's your biggest concern in the Keys right now?
Well, the first thing I ask everybody to do is pray for us. I know a lot of people around the world want to help.
Again, you notice these people are praying. Well, the Meyer information explains that there is no God in the way the religions think. There is no heavenly Father up there to rescue you from the hurricanes and rescue you from the fires. There is a super intelligence called the creation. It is neither good nor evil. It causes this universe to evolve for its own purposes, to help it with its own evolution. It creates human spirit forms as a part of its own evolution. We all have a spirit form that has lived many, 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 many material lives here on the earth. Now, religion was brought to the earth by people who came here in the ancient past who were trying to gain control of this planet for themselves. One of this one group is called the Giza Intelligences, and we'll get to them in a minute. But the propaganda and the wrong thinking of sectarianism and religion has permeated all of the world. And that's one of the reasons why we have a gigantic overpopulation, because we don't understand the universal consciousness. We don't understand the creational natural laws, the laws related to population, the laws related to love, the laws related to harmony in your thinking, the laws related to abundance and prosperity, the laws related to striving. We don't understand these creational laws, and we've substituted real effective knowledge for religion. And we'll talk more about this in a minute. I want to, again, play a clip here on the hurricane.
We want to go back to World News Tonight anchor David Muir, who is leading our coverage on the ground from Naples. David, good morning again. And I know there in Naples, everyone's bracing for what could be a catastrophic hit a little bit later today.
Yeah, you've been talking so often with Ginger this morning, both of you have, about the storm surge. You know, the winds are a real concern, but the water is an enormous concern here in Naples, 3 feet above sea level, and they're expecting a surge up to 15 feet. We do have with us this morning Naples Mayor Bill Barnett, who has lived here in Florida himself since 1973. And Mayor Barnett, it's David Muir at ABC. Thanks for being here. And I wanted to ask you, first of all, this westward shift of the track we learned about just 24 hours ago, and are you confident that people had enough time to get out of harm's way?
Yes, I am. I thank you, David. I feel that that our people have been, our citizens have been evacuating since early in the week, and they really took this storm seriously. Compared to Wilma, where there was this lackadaisical, complacent, like, no, it's not. We're not going to have a hurricane. This time, everybody has really heeded, and our town is like a ghost town.
You know, you bring up Wilma, Mayor, and I remember being in Key West for Wilma. We were preparing for significant damage there. It was better than expected there, but obviously much worse here in Naples. And if I remember correctly, at the time it was about 125 mile per hour winds that you saw in Wilma right here in Naples. That's what they're forecasting later this afternoon. What kind of damage did you see then? And what kind of wind damage are you expecting this afternoon?
So we've destroyed our forests. The forests moderate the weather. If you don't have the forests moderating the weather, the very hot air collides with the cold air, forms tornadoes, forms hurricanes. When you start to deforest an area, it becomes more and more prone to these fires as well. I also want to talk about, and I'll play another clip, about the conflict between the left and the right. This is the political situation in the United States that was talked about by the Meyer material.
A major difference between the right and the left concerns the way each seeks to improve society. Conservatives believe that the way to a better society is almost always through the moral improvement of the individual, by each person doing battle with his or her own weaknesses and flaws. It is true that in violent and evil societies such as fascist, communist, or Islamist tyrannies, the individual must be preoccupied with battling outside forces. Almost everywhere else, though, certainly in a free and decent country such as America, the greatest battle of the individual must be with inner forces, that is, with his or her moral failings. The left, on the other hand, believes that the way to a better society is almost always through doing battle with society's moral failings. Thus, in America, the left concentrates its efforts on combating sexism, racism, intolerance, xenophobia, homophobia, Islamophobia, and the many other evils that the left believes permeate American society. One important consequence of this left-right distinction is that those on the left are far more preoccupied with politics than those on the right. Since the left is so much more interested in fixing society than in fixing the individual, politics inevitably becomes the vehicle for societal improvement. That's why whenever the term activist is used, we almost always assume that the term refers to someone on the left. Another consequence of this left-right difference is that since conservatives believe society is changed one person at a time, they accept that change happens gradually. This isn't fast enough for the left, which is always and everywhere focused on social revolution. An excellent example of this was a statement by the then presidential candidate Barack Obama just days before his first election in 2008. To a rapturous audience, he declared, "We are 5 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America."
Ooh, a lot of clips. I could play more, and perhaps I will play another clip. I'm not sure. I wanted to cover one other thing. The Meyer material talks about the danger of religion. And one of the things that I stumbled across today that I thought was absolutely fantastic and interesting is that religious experiences shrink part of the brain called the hippocampus. And this was a study that was done at Duke University, I believe. The hippocampus is part of the limbic system, and it plays roles in short-term memory, long-term memory, spatial memory, and I think it also plays a role with regulating emotion, and I'll have to find that particular article. Now, religion, I believe, also causes internal stress with people because you have a spirit form from creation, and it's called your innermost self, your spirit form and your spiritual consciousness. And your spiritual consciousness will impulse your material consciousness with the truth. And if you pay attention and you learn to pay attention to these signals and these impulses, it will help you to maintain a state of calm in your psyche. Now, if you're a very, very religious person, you're feeding your material consciousness material which your spirit form is sending out impulses that are in conflict with. So this causes a tremendous internal stress within people. And they don't understand what's going on. This is what's going on. I believe it also can lead people to be physically ill, to be sick. But I was watching a YouTube video where this girl, who was probably the head of her class, she was the number one GPA in the whole school. I don't know what college this was, but she was very religious. And as she spoke more and more about religion and how important it was to her and how it helped her with her schooling and everything. She started shaking and she started trembling, and her voice became weaker and weaker, and she was going through this very emotional experience. And you know how I was saying the hippocampus is shrunk. It begins to atrophy when people have religion experiences. And that hippocampus plays a role not only in memory and things like that, but also in dealing and regulating religion. So she was having this religious moment, and she kept kind of, she was quaking and shaking, and she eventually collapsed right in the middle of her presentation. So my theory is she was in an incredible internal conflict because her own spirit form was resonating truthful impulses from the universal, from the creation. And it was conflicting with her religious experience and background. And right in front of this big crowd, she collapsed because of this great internal conflict. So, let me read a little section here. It says, they argue that some individuals in the religious minority who struggle with their beliefs, and I think there's a lot of people which struggle with their beliefs, experience higher levels of stress. This causes a release of stress hormones that are known to depress the volume of the hippocampus over time. So perhaps you would not be surprised to learn that a portion of the emotion system of the brain, the limbic system, is in charge of transferring information into memory. From years of experiments and surgical experience, we now know that the main location for the transfer of this is in the portion of the temporal lobe called the hippocampus. So this is very, very interesting. And my next little section of notes here is something I took notes on but never talked about yet. I don't think I have anyway. In Contact 212, it talks about the biblical books and that how there were scribes which wrote down what Luke and Job, people like that said, but they often did not write down what they were told. Let me read a little bit of this. It became entirely perceptible that all the biblical books were not written in a single case by the people to whom they were ascribed. So it is also incorrect that the Gospel of Luke and the Acts of the Apostles came from Luke, and furthermore, the book of Job was not written by this man himself. Moreover, the letters that are listed in the New Testament were not written by those to whom they are assigned. In truth, the people, these apostles, were illiterates who let the scribes write the letters to whom they had to pay. These scribes had to be paid. Thus, the one who was dictating the letter also couldn't control what the scribe wrote down, because many of the things that were dictated were written down wrong. They were falsified. So this includes also the acts of the fantastic stories associated to Paul, who in his consciousness confusion saw himself as a martyr, and thus also lived and worked accordingly and followed this. And then he ultimately died. He was killed by assassin, they say. It's crazy. Moses, this also happened to Moses, who had many enemies in his own ranks. And he was eventually killed. Matthew couldn't read and write. The Gospel of Matthew was dictated by Matthew to a scribe named Joshua, who interpreted the whole thing in his free discretion and falsified much of what was there. Now, it looks like I'm going to run out of time here, which is, I guess, okay. I wanted to talk, well, there's a lot I wanted to talk about that we're not going to talk about right now, but that's okay. The story of Emmanuel, according to my information, I was in the beginning, I saw the name Emmanuel, and the Meyer material says the person that we call Jesus Christ today, was originally known by the name Emmanuel. And I thought, how can that possibly be true? I mean, the central figure of Western society, we all know is Jesus, right? Well, I stumbled across a fact that's not talked about very much. The fact that the letter J wasn't even in existence until about 1550 or so. It was invented by a guy named Gian Giorgio Torricino in 1550, an Italian scholar and playwright who started substituting in various places the letter J, the new letter J, for the old letter I and the old letter Y. And if you look at the original King James 1611 version, it says our Lord and Savior, IESVS, because the person that we call Jesus was during the time of the Renaissance was called IESVS or IESUS. He was called Iesus. Some argue that he was called Yeshua. But one thing he couldn't have been called Jesus because there was no letter J in the Hebrew and the Greek or the Aramaic. None of the earth-based languages. Now, the Meyer material says the Lyrian language did have the letter J in it. But none of the earth peoples in the ancient world spoke the J sound. So it wasn't until about 1550 that the person that was originally called Emmanuel started to become called Jesus. And allegedly, Billy and a Greek Catholic priest named Isa Rashid discovered something called the Talmud of Emmanuel in the slope of a cave in Jerusalem in 1963. This ancient script was translated, in some places really poorly translated, by a guy named Isa Rashid. And this first version of the Talmud of Emmanuel was published with many, many errors in it, many problems in it. Now we have the new version of the Talmud of Emmanuel, which for one reason or another I haven't gotten to yet. I seem to be very slow on this information related to Emmanuel. I always come at it very slowly and kind of methodically and very step by step. But the person that we call Jesus today, and if you look in the New Testament, in the Matthew chapter 1 or Isaiah chapter 7, you'll find that they say his name is Emmanuel in those passages. But for some reason, we say that's just a title. Now, the translators didn't think so at the time. But anyway, in some incredible way, we've already gone out of time. Thanks for listening. Wow, the people in the archives are just listening like crazy. That's so encouraging. Maybe our United States can survive if enough people will turn the corner and start paying attention to this material. Have a great day. You've been listening to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. Have a great day. Bye-bye.